She called him an annoying old man on the day of his funeral. I stood alone in that empty chapel while my siblings laughed over property values just 3 blocks away. They skipped his burial and filed liquidation papers before the casket even hit dirt. Then they told the town I was too senile to hold a wrench. My father built our name with grease and grit. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I kept every receipt, every clause, every signature. The will had a clause, 6 months of fireproof proof, and I was just getting started. My name is Calvin Whitaker, and I'm 75 years old. Every morning, I unlock Harold's repair shop at exactly 7, just like my father did for 40 years before me. My father Harold taught me everything about fixing things, machines and character alike. His coffee tin still sits on the counter, and his old leather ledger carries that familiar trace of oil and dignity. My siblings, James, Ellen and Marcus, never understood Dad's ways. They saw him as a roadblock to quick profits, mocking his careful methods while they chased fast fortunes in the city. What they don't know is that I inherited more than just Dad's tools. Every promise, every detail, every transaction, I kept them all, neat as Harold taught me. Those records tell quite a story, one that would interest any decent lawyer. But let me start from the beginning. The morning of Dad's funeral dawned grey and heavy, like his workshop after hours. I arrived early to First Methodist, where we'd said goodbye to Mom 15 years before. The same stained glass, the same creaking wooden pews, but this time something was different. The church sat empty, except for Frank Thompson in the front row, steady as always. You know that hollow feeling when you're waiting for people who won't show. The lilies by the casket had already started dropping petals, and each one hitting the carpet echoed through the chapel like another reminder of absence. "They're not coming, Cal," my cousin Rita whispered, catching me by the elbow, her face pinched with that particular look people get when they're carrying bad news. "I talked to Ellen yesterday. She said—" Rita glanced at the floor, then back at me. "She said there was no point coming all this way for, and I'm quoting here, that annoying old man." My throat tightened. "And James? Marcus?" Ellen spoke for all of them. Something about a business meeting they couldn't reschedule. Rita squeezed my arm and shuffled away, leaving me with the bitter taste of their excuse. Frank came up beside me, his work-worn hands clasped in front of him. We'd grown up together, spent countless hours in Dad's shop learning the proper way to hold a wrench, to treat a customer, to live with honor. "Want me to say something, Cal?" "No." I straightened my tie, one of Dad's old ones actually. The fabric still held a trace of his aftershave. "I'll do it." I walked to the pulpit, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Looking out at those vacant pews, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Harold Whitaker," I began, "was a craftsman of the old school. He believed in doing things right the first time, in keeping your word, in treating everyone, from the bank president to the paper boy, with the same steady respect." The words bounced off the chapel walls, but I kept going. Each virtue I named felt like laying another stone in a wall between what my siblings thought and what Dad truly was. Frank nodded along, and I swear I saw tears in his eyes when I described how Dad stayed late every Christmas Eve through the 70s, fixing toys for families who couldn't afford new ones. After the service, Frank and I stood by the fresh-turned earth. The cemetery worker waited discreetly by his truck, ready to lower the casket once we left. "The lawyer called," I said, pulling Dad's pocket watch from my vest. The gold case caught the weak sunlight. "Readings at 5. Frank checked his own watch. "That's in 2 hours. You sure you're up for it today?" The weight of the pocket watch felt heavier than usual. Dad had carried it for 50 years, checking it before opening the shop each morning, before closing each night. Now it was mine, along with everything else he'd built. "Has to be done." We killed time at the diner across from the lawyer's office, neither of us touching our coffee. As dusk settled, we crossed the street to the old brick building where Jameson and Sons had handled local legal matters since before I was born. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed like trapped flies, casting harsh shadows as we approached the conference room. Through the glass panel in the door, I caught their reflections. Ellen's perfectly styled hair, James's expensive suit, Marcus's new Rolex catching the light as he gestured about something. They were smirking. Actually smirking like this was some kind of victory lap. My fingers tightened around Dad's watch. Frank's hand settled on my shoulder, steady as always. Remember what your dad used to say about poker faces? I nodded. Keep your cards close and your dignity closer. Through the glass, I watched Mr. Jameson arrange a thick manila envelope on the conference table. My siblings leaned forward like vultures spotting prey. I took a deep breath, felt the weight of Dad's watch one more time, and reached for the door handle. The door handle felt cool against my palm as I stepped inside. Ellen's perfume hit me first. Something expensive and overwhelming just like her. James and Marcus sat shoulder to shoulder on one side of the conference table, both in suits that probably cost more than Dad's monthly mortgage payment. Calvin, Mr. Calloway nodded, gesturing to an empty chair. Please have a seat. Mr. Davidson, you're welcome to stay as well. He gave Frank a polite smile as my friend took up position against the wall behind me. I settled into the chair, Dad's pocket watch a familiar weight in my vest. The leather folder in front of Mr. Calloway looked worn, like it had been opened and closed dozens of times. My siblings' eyes kept darting to it, then to each other. Now then, Mr. Calloway cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. I'll keep this straightforward. Your father, Harold Whitaker, left explicit instructions regarding the disposition of his estate, primarily concerning the repair shop. He opened the folder, shuffling through papers with practiced efficiency. The business and property are to be divided equally among his 4 children, Ellen, James, Marcus, and Calvin. Ellen's perfectly painted lips curved upward. James and Marcus exchanged what they probably thought was a subtle glance. Something cold settled in my stomach. Equal shares, Ellen mused, reaching into her designer handbag. How appropriate. She slid a blue folder across the table toward Mr. Calloway. Speaking of which, we've already taken steps to ensure the most efficient handling of our inheritance. Oh? Mr. Calloway raised an eyebrow, opening the folder. It's about unlocking value, Marcus chimed in, adjusting his Rolex. Being practical. Mr. Calloway frowned as he examined the contents. These appear to be liquidation papers, already filed with the county, I see. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the worn padding under my fingers. Liquidation? The property's worth more as a clean lot, James explained, like he was talking to a particularly slow child. The building's old, the equipment's outdated, we've already got interest from developers. And Dad's name? My voice sounded distant in my own ears. The reputation he spent 50 years building, Ellen scoffed, checking her manicure. Nostalgia costs money, Calvin. We're not running a museum. I turned to Mr. Calloway, trying to keep my voice steady. These papers, they've already filed them. What authority exists to stop this? The lawyer adjusted his glasses again, flipping through the documents with methodical care. The filings are pending, Mr. Whitaker. While your siblings have initiated the process, it can be contested with valid grounds. Contested? Marcus laughed. On what grounds? We own 75% of the shares. I felt Frank's hand squeeze my elbow. When I glanced back, he mouthed 2 words. Not over. I'll need copies of everything, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. Of course. Mr. Calloway pressed his intercom. Susan, could you make a complete set of copies for Mr. Whitaker? Ellen was already standing, smoothing her skirt. James, call the broker. See if he can meet first thing tomorrow. She smiled at me, all teeth and no warmth. We should wrap this up quickly, for efficiency's sake. James pulled out his phone as they filed toward the door. I'll see if we can push up the sale date. No point dragging things out. I sat there, watching them leave, their voices fading down the hallway as they discussed property values and development potential. The copy machine hummed in the outer office, spitting out paper that documented exactly how little they cared about Dad's legacy. Mr. Calloway gathered the copies into a fresh folder, sliding it across to me. I am sorry, Mr. Whitaker. Your father was a good man. Yes, I said, taking the folder. Yes, he was. I trudged up my front steps as the evening shadows lengthened, that folder from Calloway's office weighing like lead under my arm. The porch light flickered. Needed to change that bulb soon. Guess some habits of maintenance never leave you. My answering machine blinked angry red in the dim hallway. 2 messages. I pressed play while hanging up my coat, Dad's watch chain catching on the hook for a moment. Calvin? It's Margaret Wheeler. Her voice crackled through the speaker. I hate to say this, but I heard you're having trouble with the tools lately? Getting a bit confused? My Henry needs his mower serviced, but maybe I should take it elsewhere. Delete. Cal, Bob Jennings here. Look, no offense, but word is you're slipping some. At your age it's natural, but delete. I sank into my kitchen chair, the vinyl squeaking just like it had for 20 years. Margaret Wheeler, whose son's first bike Dad fixed for free. Bob Jennings, who used to bring us coffee during winter repairs. Now they thought I couldn't handle a wrench. The phone rang. Mrs. Peterson from next door. Calvin, I had the strangest conversation with your sister Ellen yesterday. She mentioned something about you having memory troubles. Said you couldn't keep track of parts anymore. My fingers tightened on the receiver. Did she now? Well, yes. And James told the Hendersons much the same thing. After I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long while. The clock ticked past 8, then 9. Finally, I grabbed Dad's old shop keys and drove over. The building stood silent in the twilight, just a hulking shadow against the purple sky. Inside, my footsteps echoed off concrete floors worn smooth by decades of work. I didn't bother with the lights. I knew every inch by heart. My hand found the wall where Dad's lessons still lived in faded grease pencil. Measure, twice, cut once. Quality over quick. Trust the tools, trust yourself. Simple wisdom that built a reputation my siblings couldn't wait to cash in. In the office, I pulled out my bank book. The numbers weren't pretty. Fighting a sale would mean lawyer fees, court costs, maybe months without income. And now with those rumors spreading, the diner's neon sign buzzed overhead as I slid into the booth across from Frank. Coffee steam curled between us while I laid it all out. The whisper campaign, the money problems, the sheer weight of it all. I'm tired, Frank. I rubbed my eyes. These tools are getting heavier every year. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's time to let go. Frank set his cup down hard enough to slosh coffee onto the Formica. Bull. Harold trusted you with the hard jobs because you never quit. Trust yourself now. Dad's not here anymore. No, Frank agreed. But his paperwork is. I blinked. What? Your father was meticulous, Cal. You really think he'd leave his life's work unprotected? Back home, midnight found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by estate documents. Dad's ledger sat open beside me, its pages carrying that familiar hint of oil and leather. Every line neat, every detail accounted for. I spread out the will, the property deeds, the business licenses. Somewhere in all this paper trail, Dad must have built in a safeguard, something my siblings' arrogance made them overlook. What did you hide in here, old man? I whispered, reaching for another file. What ace did you tuck away for a rainy day? The clock struck 1 as I kept reading, looking for that one crucial detail that could save everything Dad built. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping across decades of careful documentation. Somewhere in these pages lay the answer. I just had to find it. The sun wasn't even up when Frank knocked on my door, carrying a stack of printouts and 2 cups of coffee. County Records Office opens at 6, he said, handing me a cup. I was first in line. We spread everything across my dining room table. Mr. Calloway's packet, Dad's old files, and Frank's fresh printouts of county estate guidelines. The coffee grew cold as we cross-referenced every footnote, every subsection, every tiny asterisk that might hide our salvation. Wait, my finger stopped on a dense paragraph buried in the estate guidelines. Look at this. Frank leaned in as I read aloud. Property disposition may be stayed if active management by any heir continues for 6 consecutive months following probate notification. Check the will packet, Frank said quickly. I fumbled through Mr. Calloway's envelope until I found a similar clause, tucked away in the fine print like a lifeline waiting to be grabbed. My hands shook as I dialed Mr. Calloway's number. Each ring felt like an eternity. Calvin, he answered on the 4th ring. I was about to call you. The 6-month clause, I said without preamble. Is it valid? A pause, then papers shuffling. Ah, you found that. I could hear him settling into his chair. Yes, it's quite valid. Your father insisted on including it in his final revision last year. Rather forcefully, as I recall. My throat tightened. Even near the end, Dad was still protecting his legacy. What exactly constitutes active management? I asked. The standard requirements, Mr. Calloway replied. Regular business hours, documented customer transactions, vendor relationships, payroll if applicable. You'll need bank deposits showing genuine commerce, not just keeping the lights on. The court looks for Clear evidence of ongoing operations. I grabbed a notepad. How detailed? Everything logged and dated. Equipment orders, repair invoices, customer receipts, a proper paper trail. One missed week could invalidate the entire period. Frank was already pulling out his calendar as I hung up. 6 months, he said, marking today's date with a red X. That's our window. The numbness that had gripped me since the will reading began to thaw, replaced by something warmer. Purpose, maybe, or just plain stubbornness, Dad's favorite trait. We spent the next hour mapping it out on Frank's calendar. Weekly revenue targets, supply orders, advertising dates. Basic stuff that felt monumental now. Each milestone we marked was another barrier between the shop and my siblings' liquidation plans. We'll need help, Frank said, tapping his pen on July's page. I can handle books and ordering after my shift at the plant. I nodded, adding another note. Mike's boy needs summer work. He's good with tools like his grandfather. Around 10, we drove to the shop. The morning light hit the faded sign just right, making Harold's Repair stand out against the brick. I found Dad's old paintbrushes in the back office and a half can of blue enamel, his favorite for touching up tool handles. The new sign took shape under my brush. Harold's Repair. Reopening 8 a.m. tomorrow. Each letter felt like a declaration of war. Not bad, Frank said, stepping back to admire my work. Your father would have appreciated those clean edges. I was wiping my hands when I heard it. The low rumble of an engine across the street. A dark sedan sat idling in the shadows of Peterson's Hardware. Even without seeing the faces, I knew who it was. The passenger window lowered smoothly. A phone emerged, its camera lens catching the morning light as it pointed toward my fresh-painted sign. Ellen's voice drifted across the empty street. Got it. Send it to Mark. The window hummed shut. The sedan pulled away, leaving only a faint trace of exhaust in the cool morning air. I turned the key in the lock, testing it twice like Dad always did. 6 months suddenly felt very long and very short at the same time. 8 o'clock sharp, just like Dad taught me. I unlocked the front door of Harold's Repair and flipped the sign to open, with the same motion he'd used thousands of times before. The hinges needed oil. I made a mental note to fix that later. Frank had already been by, leaving his mark with a fresh clipboard mounted behind the counter. Daily operations log was printed across the top in his neat block letters, with columns for time, activity, and initials. Below it hung Dad's old calculator, still showing faint fingerprints in the dust. You know that feeling when you're being watched? That's how those first quiet hours felt. I logged each tiny task, probably overdoing it. 8 hours a.m. Open shop. 8:05 a.m. Systems check. 8:15 a.m. Counter setup. Every entry got my initials. CW, CW, CW. The morning sun crawled across the empty parking lot while I worked the phones. Yes, this is Harold's Repair. That's right, we're open again. Free diagnostic checks this week. I kept my voice steady, professional, just like I'd learned watching Dad handle difficult customers. The vendor calls came next. Morning, Tom. Need to restart our regular order schedule. I photographed every confirmation email, every delivery notice. Maybe it was paranoid, but something in my gut said we'd need proof of everything. Around 10, our first walk-in arrived, Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, holding a mixer that screamed like a banshee. I heard you were back, she said, setting it on the counter. Harold fixed this 3 times before. Nobody else could get it right. I wrote up the diagnostic slip, making sure my handwriting was clear enough to photocopy. We'll take good care of it, Ma'am, just like always. The morning trickled by with a few more curious faces. Each interaction got logged, each receipt carefully filed. I drove to the bank at lunch to deposit the morning's takes, modest but real. The teller smiled when I asked for extra copies of the deposit slips. Calvin, my phone buzzed just as I was heading back. It was Anderson Tire Supply. We never got your order confirmation for today's delivery. My stomach tightened. I sent it 2 hours ago. I'm looking at the email right now. Nothing here, he said. System must have hiccuped. Mind sending it again? I did, then printed the confirmation and delivery schedule. These went into a fresh folder labeled Vendor Communications, June. The front door was still locked when I got back. I always checked twice, another of Dad's habits. But something felt off. I walked around to the service entrance and found it unlocked, a small paint stick wedged in the latch. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered, removing the stick and checking the lock mechanism. No damage, thankfully. Just someone's idea of a practical joke. The front sign had been flipped to closed while I was gone. Real subtle. Remember when I said to document everything? I took photos of the paint stick and the sign before correcting them. Then I added 2 more entries to the operations log. 1:15 p.m., unauthorized entry attempt noted, and 1:16 p.m., security measures verified. Frank would be proud of how official it sounded. I was on hold with Anderson Tire again when my cell phone pinged. Text from the parts delivery service. Schedule conflict for today's drop-off. Will attempt tomorrow. Of course there was a conflict. I noted it in the log, saved the text, and looked at the calendar Frank had mounted by the phone. The days until our 6-month deadline stared back at me. 5 months and 3 weeks to go. The afternoon light slanted through the garage doors, catching dust, motes in its beam. For a moment, I could almost see Dad standing there at his workbench, methodically logging the day's jobs in his own careful hand. He'd taught me that patience was just stubbornness with better manners. I picked up the phone again. Time to find another delivery service. You're certainly keeping busy, Frank said when he stopped by to check the books after his shift. He flipped through my log entries with raised eyebrows. Just being thorough, I replied, showing him the folder of photos and confirmations. Figure we might need it. He nodded slowly. They're not going to make this easy, are they? I pulled into the lot at 6:30 the next morning, while dew still beaded on the windows. The sun hadn't cleared the buildings yet, but I wanted photos of everything before we opened. The kind that'd show tampering clear as day if anyone tried something cute. North face, east entrance, loading bay, I muttered, snapping shots from every angle like some amateur crime scene photographer. The early birds at the diner across the street probably thought I'd lost it, circling my own shop with a camera. But Dad always said documentation was just insurance you paid for with time instead of money. Frank arrived as I was finishing up. "Morning, boss," he called, carrying a box of fresh cleaning supplies. "Thought we could reorganize while it's quiet. Read my mind." I unlocked the service bay doors. Been thinking about the workflow. We spent the next hour shifting tool cabinets and workbenches, opening lanes between stations. Dad's layout had worked fine for 1 or 2 jobs at a time, but we needed volume now. Every minute lost to shuffling equipment was a minute we couldn't bill. "This'll cut walking time in half," Frank said, stepping back to survey our work. The space felt bigger somehow, more professional, like we were ready for anything. The bell chimed at 8 sharp. Mrs. Cooper from the hardware store stood in the doorway, holding her ancient bandsaw. "Calvin, I heard you were open again, but—" She glanced around nervously. "Well, some folks were saying that we're not up to code." I kept my voice gentle. "Or that the work might be unsafe." Her cheeks colored. "I didn't mean, no offense taken." I reached under the counter for our certification folder. "Here's our updated safety documentation. And this," I pulled out a guarantee form Dad had designed years ago, "is our written promise. Any work that fails, we fix free. Just like Harold always did." She relaxed visibly. That's what I told them. Harold never cut corners. An hour later, Mr. Peterson brought in his riding mower with the same hesitation. I showed him. The same papers gave him the same guarantee. He nodded and left, looking relieved. Around 2, my phone buzzed. The afternoon parts delivery was having system issues. "Could you clarify what kind of issues?" I asked, already knowing it was useless. "Just clerical errors. Very sorry for the inconvenience." I hung up and checked our inventory. The clean shelves were starting to show gaps. Nothing critical yet, but getting there. At my desk, I pulled up the week's numbers. Between lost deliveries and slow customer flow, we were bleeding cash. By Friday, we'd be in the red. Frank found me staring at the spreadsheet. "We could trim hours," he suggested, "or maybe find cheaper suppliers." I shook my head. Dad built this place on quality work and honest hours. We stick to his standards. The afternoon light was fading when I heard a familiar diesel engine rumble outside. Mr. Jenkins' old truck pulled up, trailing a flatbed with his primary field tractor. "Calvin," his voice boomed through the shop, "tell me you've got time for an old friend." I hadn't seen him since the funeral. He'd been running his farm single-handed since his sons moved away, and that tractor was his lifeline. "Transmission's acting up something fierce," he said. "Need her running by Friday, or I'll miss my planting window. Heard some talk about you being closed, but I figured that was nonsense. I walked out to inspect the tractor. Classic Ford 8N, probably older than me, but built like a tank. The transmission issue was obvious and fixable. I can have her ready Thursday afternoon, I said, writing up the estimate. The parts and labor would cover payroll with room to spare. More importantly, it'd show we could still handle serious work. Mr. Jenkins grinned and stuck out his hand. Just like your dad always could count on this place. As we shook on it, I caught movement across the street. A dark sedan rolled past, passenger window down, phone camera pointed our way. Didn't matter. We had work to do. I gestured to Frank. Let's get her in the bay. We've got a transmission to rebuild. The tractor job was exactly what we needed. Frank and I dove in first thing Wednesday morning, documenting every step like we were building evidence. Forecourt. And honestly, we were. Hand me that gasket set, I called from under the transmission housing. And don't forget to... Already logged it, Frank said, passing the parts. He held up his phone. Got photos of the old components too, timestamp and everything. You know that feeling when you're doing something your father taught you, and suddenly you can hear his voice clear as day? Working on that Ford 8N, I kept hearing Dad. Records save reputations, son. Good work proves itself. Between transmission pulls, we kept the smaller jobs flowing. Mrs. Cooper's band saw, done, and documented. Mr. Peterson's mower, fixed with photos. Every receipt went in the system, every labor hour logged with military precision. I even started recording my supplier calls, legal in our state with one-party consent. Good thing, too, because those conversations got interesting. So, you're confirming. Other brake pad shipment for tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I asked one vendor. Yes, absolutely confirmed, Mr. Whitaker. Next day, no delivery. I played the recording for their regional manager, and wouldn't you know it? Parts arrived within the hour with a rush fee waived. I printed up Dad's old Harold's Honesty Promise, the guarantee that made his reputation, and mounted it right where customers couldn't miss it. Simple stuff. Fair prices, quality, parts, work done right or made right, added copies to every invoice too, just like Harold used to do, more than one old-timer said, nodding at that promise sheet. Those nods meant everything. Thursday night rolled around and the tractor was purring like new. I ran it through every test I could think of, documenting each one. Frank had gone home, but I stayed, mopping floors and prepping paperwork for morning. Some habits you learn young. Dad never left a dirty shop floor, and neither would I. Friday morning, Mr. Jenkins arrived early. His face lit up at that first engine rumble. Calvin, she hasn't run this smooth in years. He climbed down from the cab, grinning. Mind if I tell some folks? Tell anyone you like, I said, handing him the detailed invoice with all our documentation attached. By noon, my phone was buzzing with text messages from other farmers. Word travels fast in agricultural circles. 3 more tractors were scheduled for next week, plus a combine that needed transmission work. Real jobs, good money, honest work. I just stepped out for coffee when I saw it. A thick envelope on the welcome mat. Legal letterhead. Never a good sign at the best of times. Inside was an emergency motion filed by my siblings' lawyer. They wanted court permission to proceed with liquidation immediately, claiming gross mismanagement and deteriorating business conditions. The hearing date hit me like a punch, 11 days away. We weren't even halfway through our 6-month window. I spread the papers across Dad's old desk and started circling their claims in red. They twisted everything, called our documented repairs suspicious activity, labeled our customer guarantee desperate measures, even tried to paint Frank's presence as unauthorized labor. My hand was shaking as I dialed Mr. Calloway's number. He picked up on the first ring. Already have it in front of me, he said before I could speak. They're trying to cut our timeline short. Can they do that? They can try. Papers rustled on his end. But we've got documentation of every repair, every part, every customer interaction, timestamps, photos, receipts. You've built us a solid defense, Calvin. We fight this hard. I looked at the motion again, at all those red circles marking their lies. Then at Dad's promise mounted on the wall and the full service bay visible through my office window. What's our next step? I asked, pulling out a fresh legal pad. First, Mr. Calloway said, we're going to go through every piece of evidence you've collected. Then we're going to show the court exactly what honest business looks like. You know how time speeds up when you're racing. A deadline? Those 11 days flew by like minutes. Every morning I'd arrive before sunrise, checking and double-checking our documentation system. Ever try explaining business practices to a judge? Everything needs to be crystal clear. Bank statements first, Frank would remind me, spreading papers across the counter. Money talks. We'd developed a rhythm. Daily deposits, no matter how small. Even if it was just a $20 diagnostic fee, it went straight to the bank with a time-stamped receipt. You'd be amazed how those little deposits add up to tell a story of steady business. I kept hearing Dad's voice. Details matter, son. He wasn't wrong. When Mrs. Thompson's lawnmower came in, I photographed every step of the repair, had her sign off on the work order and filed it all away. Even took pictures of the worn-out parts we replaced, labeled with date and time. The parts markup was something I worried over. Dad always said fair profit keeps honest shops running. So when Jenkins needed follow-up parts for his second tractor, I used Dad's old formula. Cost plus reasonable markup, all documented clear as day. Some shops might gouge, but that wasn't our way. Calvin's cooking the books. That rumor started circulating about day 3. Heard it from Pete at the hardware store, who heard it from someone who knew someone. You know how small towns work. So I put up a sign. All business records available for customer review. Right there in the front window. Had a few takers too, mostly older folks who remembered Dad's way of doing things. They'd sit at the counter, look through our files, nod their heads. Just like Harold taught you, they'd say. Made my chest tight every time. Evenings were the hardest. After closing, Frank and I would pull out Dad's old adding machine, this chunky beige thing that sounds like a typewriter. We'd run the day's numbers, reconcile accounts, file everything in triplicate, sometimes past midnight, but who's counting? Your father would be proud, Frank said one night, watching me label yet another folder. My hands were stained with ink and grease just like Dad's used to be. The profit margins were thin, real thin, but they were honest numbers, built on honest work. Each evening reconciliation showed us staying just above water, which was all we needed to prove viability. When the 6-month mark finally arrived, I felt every one of my 75 years. My back ached from bending over engines, my eyes were tired from squinting at receipts, but by God we'd made it. The final ledger showed modest profit, small but legitimate. Every penny accounted for, every transaction documented. At 6 p.m., I posted the sign, closed early, court tomorrow. Took me 3 tries to get the lettering straight. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Inside, I printed our final summaries, profit and loss, accounts receivable, cash flow statements. Each one went into a fresh binder, tagged and indexed. The whole story of 6 months' work bound in black vinyl and labeled with Dad's shop name. Frank helped me do one last walkthrough. Everything in its place, just like Dad insisted. Tools cleaned and hung, floor swept, lights checked. The shop looked ready for another 50 years of honest work. I locked the front door, then the back, checking each twice. Force of habit, I suppose. The security lights kicked on in the parking lot as I pulled the main breaker. Dad's old pocket watch felt heavy in my hand. 6:47 p.m., almost 12 hours until court. I walked past the pegboard wall where Dad's favorite wrench hung, worn smooth from decades of use. Stopping there, I reached out and touched its familiar handle. Tomorrow decides everything, I whispered to the empty shop. The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. October cold, sharp and clean. My breath fogged as I took one last look at the shop's dark windows, then turned toward home, that black binder tucked under my arm like precious cargo. The courthouse steps felt steeper than usual that morning. Maybe it was the weight of Dad's watch in my pocket, or maybe just my own tired bones. Frank walked beside me, steady as always, while Mr. Calloway led the way with our black binder held tight against his chest. You ever notice how courthouses smell like furniture polish and worry? That's what hit me as we pushed through the heavy doors. The marble floor echoed with each step, making me think of church, another place where truth matters. My siblings were already there, huddled with their broker, some slick fellow in an expensive suit, and their attorney, who kept checking his phone like he had better places to be. They didn't look my way, but I could feel their certainty like a cold draft. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and we stood as Judge Martinez entered. She had kind eyes but a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of my third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson. You couldn't slip anything past either of them. I've reviewed the filings, she said, settling into her chair. Let's keep this concise. Petitioners first. Their attorney launched right in, talking fast about market efficiency and underutilized assets. Then he got to the part that made my blood pressure spike. Furthermore, Your Honor, the respondent's advanced age and documented confusion make him unsuitable for managing daily operations. We have statements from— Objection, Mr. Calloway cut in, smooth as silk. Counsel is attempting to introduce unsubstantiated claims about my client's competency. Judge Martinez nodded. Sustained. Stick to the business facts, Counselor. I watched my siblings shift in their seats. They'd counted on those rumors doing more damage. When our turn came, Mr. Calloway opened that black binder like he was handling rare manuscripts. Your Honor, direct your attention to Exhibit A, daily operational logs time-stamped and verified. Page after page, he laid out our case. Remember all those photos I took? Every morning's opening, every delivery, every repair. They filled a whole section. Then came the vendor affidavits. Seems our suppliers had some choice words about those mysterious delivery conflicts. Mr. Whitaker, the judge said, looking straight at me, please approach. Standing at the podium, I felt Dad's presence stronger than ever. Yes, Your Honor? Tell me about your daily routine at the shop. So I did. Told her about opening at 8 a.m. sharp, just like Dad taught me. About checking inventory, scheduling repairs, keeping the books. My voice got stronger as I spoke about maintaining Dad's standards. And these photographs? She held up one showing the shop's front window, morning light catching the open sign. Taken every morning, Your Honor. Date and timestamps in the corner. She studied several more documents, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. What about profitability? Mr. Calloway was ready. He presented our month-end summaries, each one showing that thin but steady profit margin we'd fought so hard to maintain. I glanced at my siblings then. Couldn't help myself. Their faces had gone pale, like they'd seen a ghost. Maybe they had, the ghost of their quick money dreams disappearing. The judge closed our binder and removed her glasses. I'll take this matter under advisement. We'll reconvene at 2 o'clock. 4 hours. Might as well have been 4 years. Frank and I sat in the hallway's hard wooden chairs. I held Dad's watch, its ticking somehow louder than the big wall clock above us. Tick, 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 each second carrying the weight of 6 months' work. Mr. Whitaker? I looked up to see Sarah Chen from the county newspaper. She had her notebook ready. I'm doing a piece on family businesses, she said. Would you mind telling me about your father's standards? What made Harold's Repair special? I thought carefully before answering. Dad believed in doing things right, not quick. He used to say, a rush job costs twice, once in money, once in reputation. She was writing fast when the bailiff's voice cut through the hallway. Court resuming in 5 minutes. Frank helped me up, my knees protesting the movement. Mr. Calloway appeared beside us, straightening his tie. Ready? He asked. I patted my pocket, feeling Dad's watch. Ready. The heavy courtroom doors swung open and we filed back in. Judge Martinez's chair sat empty, waiting, just like we all were now, waiting to hear if 6 months of sweat and documentation could save what Dad built. The doors opened again, and we all rose as Judge Martinez returned. She settled into her chair with that same no-nonsense efficiency, arranging papers with precise movements. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Having reviewed the evidence presented, she began, this court finds the estate clause regarding active management to be both valid and enforceable under state law. My heart started hammering so hard, I was sure Frank could too, hear it next to me. Furthermore, she continued, the respondent has provided comprehensive documentation demonstrating consistent, profitable operation of Harold's Repair Shop over the required 6-month period. She paused, looking directly at my siblings. The standard set forth in the clause has been met in full. I felt Frank's hand grip my shoulder. Therefore, the emergency motion for immediate liquidation is denied. The property sale is blocked under the terms of the estate agreement. The words hit like summer thunder. Clean, clear, and absolute. I let out a breath I'd been holding since that first morning I'd unlocked the shop 6 months ago. My sibling's broker, fellow named Peterson, started shoving papers into his briefcase like they were on fire. Their attorney was already scribbling notes, probably planning an appeal, but I could see in his eyes he knew it was over. Your Honor, Mr. Calloway said, rising smoothly, we thank the court for its careful consideration. She nodded once. This matter is concluded. "We're adjourned." The gavel crack echoed off the wood paneling, and just like that, 6 months of worry lifted from my shoulders. I turned to Mr. Calloway, trying to find words big enough for what his help had meant. He just smiled and patted my arm. "You did the work, Calvin. I just showed the proof." Frank was grinning like he'd won the state lottery. "Told you Harold knew what he was doing," he said. Sarah Chen, the reporter, was already beside us with her notebook. "Could I get the case file numbers?" she asked. "I'd like to request the certified transcript once it's filed." Mr. Calloway gave her the information, while I checked Dad's watch, just past noon. The morning's fight was done, but I knew the afternoon would bring its own kind of reckoning. Time to get back to work. I stepped outside into bright sunlight that made me squint. First order of business was calling Mr. Jenkins. His trust had helped keep us afloat when we needed it most. He answered on the second ring. "Harold's boy. I saw your truck still at the courthouse. How'd it go?" "We won," I said simply, "and I wanted to thank you. Your business meant more than you know." "Meant what I said about that tractor repair," he replied. "Best work since your dad's time." Looking down the courthouse steps, I spotted my siblings in a tight huddle. Their voices carried phrases like public relations nightmare and damage control. They were already worried about optics, about how this would play in town. I could have walked over, could have said any number of things I'd rehearsed during sleepless nights. Instead, I turned away. Let them stew in their own mess. Sometimes, silence cuts deeper than any words could. "Heading back to the shop?" Frank asked as he joined me. I checked Dad's watch again. "Can't break routine now. Someone might need a repair." We drove separately, and I parked in my usual spot behind the building. The back door opened with that familiar squeak. Note to self, finally oil those hinges. And I walked through the service bay where Dad had taught me everything worth knowing about honest work. At the front counter, I reached for the window sign. The morning sun caught its edges as I flipped it from closed to open. 3 days after the hearing, Sarah Chen's article hit the front page of the county paper. She'd done her homework, pulling choice quotes straight from the certified transcript that had just been posted online. You know how sometimes karma works in mysterious ways? Well, this wasn't one of those times. It worked exactly, as you'd expect when people's own words come back to haunt them. "Local business targeted for efficiency over family legacy," the headline read. Right there in black and white were my siblings' statements about unlocking value and treating Dad's life's work like it was nothing but a box of old parts to be sold off. My phone started ringing before I'd finished my morning coffee. First call was Mrs. Davidson, who'd been bringing her lawn equipment to Dad since before I could drive. "Calvin," she said, "I just read what they tried to do. Your father would be so proud of how you stood up for his name." That was just the beginning. All morning people called or stopped by, not for repairs, just to show support. Mr. Thompson brought donuts. The Hendersons left a card. Even old Bill Murphy, who'd argued with Dad for 30 years over pricing, came in to shake my hand. Harold was a stubborn son of a gun, Bill said, but he was honest. That's worth something in this town. Around lunch, Frank walked in with a newspaper tucked under his arm, grinning. "Seen the comments section yet?" I hadn't, but he showed me on his phone. Seemed like half the town had something to say about siblings who'd skipped their own father's funeral, then try to erase his name for quick cash. Pretty soon after that, my siblings' social media pages went dark. Funny how people can dish out criticism but can't take it. The afternoon brought more surprises. Jackson's Auto Parts called. They wanted to extend a small credit line. "We've been watching," the manager said. "You run things like your dad did. That means something to us." An hour later, Western Supply did the same. Not huge amounts, but enough to help with inventory flow. The kind of trust Dad had built over decades, starting to bloom again. Around 5, I started my closing routine. The floor needed sweeping. Amazing how much dust settles in just one day. I took my time with it, letting the quiet sink in. Just me, and the familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings. You ever notice how some moments feel bigger than they are? Like they're not just about what's happening right then, but about everything that led up to them. That's how it felt when I walked into Dad's office. The leather on his old chair was cracked, but still solid. His ledger sat on the desk where it had always been, waiting. I pulled today's deposit slip from my shirt pocket and opened the worn cover. The pages still smelled faintly of the oil that had seeped into them over years of honest work. I slipped the deposit slip between them, right where it belonged. Looking up at the pegboard, I saw Dad's wrench, the one he'd used to teach me about. Torque when I was 12. Too tight breaks things, he'd said. Too loose lets them fall apart. The trick is finding just right. I lifted it off its peg, feeling the familiar weight. The steel was dulled with age, but still true. With the shop rag from my back pocket, I wiped it clean, letting my thumb run over the worn spots where Dad's hand had gripped it thousands of times. Frank's knock came right on schedule. "Coffee?" he asked through the screen door. Seems like a day worth marking. "Give me a minute," I called back. I reached for the hammer I'd brought in that morning and picked up the nail I'd chosen. Not too big, not too small. Just right. The office wall above the desk was bare, except for Dad's certification from '62. There was space there, space that had been waiting. The hammer felt solid in my hand as I raised it toward the wall. I got to the shop before sunrise, wanting this moment to be just right. The nail I'd picked was still waiting on Dad's desk where I'd left it last night. Frank would be by soon with coffee, but this part needed to be done alone. You know that feeling when something's been weighing on you for so long, you almost forget what normal feels like. Then suddenly the weight starts lifting, and you can breathe again. That's how it felt, standing there in the quiet morning light. I lined up the nail carefully, 3 feet above the desk, centered perfect like Dad taught me. One solid hit drove it home. The wrench settled onto it like it had been waiting all these years for this spot. I stepped back, tilted my head the way Dad always did when checking if something was level. It looked right, felt right too. In my jacket pocket was the card I'd written out last night. Simple white cardstock, black ink, just 4 words. Harold Standards. Live here. Nothing fancy. Dad would have hated fancy. I pinned it under the wrench, making sure it sat straight. The court order was next. I'd had it laminated yesterday, clear as crystal in its protective sleeve. Every word that proved we'd won, every detail that showed how they'd tried to tear down what Dad built. I hung it near the counter where nobody could miss it. Legal proof that the shop wasn't going anywhere, that all their schemes had failed. "Perfect timing," Frank said from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Looks good up there." I took my cup, savoring the warmth. Feels like it belongs. The bell over the door chimed at 8 sharp. Mrs. Peterson always did like being first for everything. She walked straight to the bulletin board, where I'd posted the hearing transcript excerpts. Her lips moved as she read, and I saw her shake her head at the part where my siblings called Dad an obstacle to progress. More people filtered in as the morning went on. Not all needed repairs. Some just came to read, to see for themselves. The whispers were satisfying. Can you believe they tried that? And Harold would never have stood for such nonsense. And good thing Calvin fought back. Mr. Jenkins came by around 10, squinting at the court order through his reading glasses. "So, that's that then. They can't touch the place?" "Not a brick," I said. "Judge made it clear. They tried every angle, but Dad's paperwork was solid. Shop stays open, stays in the family." "And their reputation?" he asked, though his smile said he already knew. "Well," I said, "hard to show your face in town after the paper prints how you skipped your father's funeral and called him an annoying old man. Even harder when everyone reads how you tried sneaking through a sale behind your brother's back." Frank brought out fresh coffee as more customers gathered. Someone had printed the online comments from the newspaper article, pages of townspeople defending Dad's name, condemning my siblings' greed. Those pages found their way to the bulletin board too. I watched it all from behind the counter, feeling months of tension slowly unknot from my shoulders. 6 months of fighting, of documenting every minute, of proving Dad's way still worked. 6 months of standing guard over his legacy while they tried to dismantle it for quick cash. All of it leading to this morning, to that wrench hanging proud above his desk. Remember how I told you about Dad teaching me Torquay? How he'd guide my hands until I could feel the perfect pressure. Standing there, I could almost feel his calloused fingers wrapped around mine, showing me exactly how tight to turn the bolt. Never too much, never too little, just right. Frank caught my eye and nodded toward the wrench. We'd been friends so long he knew exactly what I was thinking about. I walked over to Dad's desk, straightened the card one last time. The morning light caught the steel just right, making it gleam like it was brand new. Looking up at that wrench, at everything it stood for, I said what needed saying, loud enough for anyone to hear. Respect outlives greed.